one in New York, it's Katie.
Really appreciate your coming to see us today. And you know, we have a very important show for you all today and for everyone at home. We're beginning with a story that has reverberated across the country and once again brings to the forefront race, violence, and fear. It began with 4 teenage boys hanging out, one man on the edge, and a chance encounter that changed everything. 17-year-old Jordan Davis was a typical American teenager. He hung out at the mall, had an on-again, off-again girlfriend, and was the heart of an inseparable group of friends. Jordan was with those friends on the night of November 23, 2012, when they decided to stop in a convenience store at a local gas station. As they pulled in, their music played loudly and could be heard outside their SUV. The driver, Tommy Storns, went inside to buy gum and cigarettes. And that's when 45-year-old Michael Dunn pulled into the gas station, parking next to them on their passenger side. Dunn's fiancée, Rhonda, got out and went inside the store. Dunn then asked the boys to turn the music down. They did, and then they turned it back up again. By the time Tommy returned to the SUV, words were exchanged, and then...
Oh my God, somebody's shooting!
Gunshots. Dunn had fired 3 shots into their SUV, and as the boys drove away, fired 7 more times.
911.
May I please have the ambulance, please?
Someone sick or hurt?
Somebody's been shot.
Jordan, who had been sitting in the back seat on the passenger side, died from gunshot wounds to the chest and legs on the way to the hospital. Dunn left the scene of the crime and never called the police. He was taken in for questioning and arrested the next day.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
During the trial, which began on February 3rd, Dunn testified he felt threatened and claimed he saw a gun in the SUV and that he fired his 9mm handgun in self-defense.
I said, "You're not gonna kill me, you son of a," and I shot.
No gun was ever found.
That defendant didn't shoot into a car full of kids to save his life. He shot into it to preserve his pride.
Dunn was found guilty on 3 counts of attempted second-degree murder, 1 count for each of the 3 boys who survived. He was also found guilty for firing a gun into a car.
I have the verdict form in count 1. There are no markings on it.
But when it came to the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Jordan Davis, the jury was deadlocked.
And based on the jury's inability to reach a verdict as to count 1, I would declare that mistried.
Although he faces a minimum of 60 years behind bars, much of the public is outraged because Michael Dunn has not been held accountable for the death of Jordan Davis.
We will continue to stand, and we will continue to wait for justice for Jordan.
Please welcome Jordan's parents, Lucia McBath and Ron Davis. First of all, I want to say to both of you, thank you for being here, and our deepest sympathies for the loss of your son. You know, I think people have been sickened by this story, but you all have been dealing with your grief for almost 1.5 years now. And it seems to me what's been lost in the coverage is the story of Jordan himself. So Ron, tell us a little bit about Jordan, your son, your only child.
You know, when I think back, I think back to when he was little and we had the first snowfall in Atlanta, Georgia. And in the front yard there was snow, and we put his little snowsuit on. We took him out, and the first time he looked at the snow, and it looked like ice cream, I guess. And he bent down and picked it up, and he put it in his mouth, and he liked it. Then all of a sudden he started frowning, because the snow was in his hand, and it was getting colder and colder. So I wiped it and put his hand in my mouth to warm his hands up, and that was his, first snowfall. I remember the first Christmas and the little train set, and the kid is sitting by the Christmas tree, and little kids, when the train goes by, they just light up, and I remember those times. I remember when he got larger and he played baseball, and, they had a pony league, and I remember when he wanted to show off, and, he'd turn a single into a double into a triple, and the pride he had that he was vast, I also remember when he played baseball, when he was a pitcher, he was satisfied because he was in control, he's the pitcher, and every eye was on him. But then when the coach put him in left field, he didn't like that so much because nobody looks at left fielders, So I remember those times. And as he got larger and became 16 years old, I remember his 16th birthday, we went with his friend Aaron, who's in the audience today. We went to the bowling alley, and he enjoyed that. He had his friends around, and we had pizza. But my fondest memories is that he loved the beach. He was a great swimmer, much better swimmer than I am. I'm a scuba diver and I do other things, but he was a great swimmer. And his mother had put him in the swimming classes, and we would go to Jacksonville Beach, and we have a certain spot by the pier that we would always go. And our fondest memories is who could stand up under the waves. You see the wave coming, we turn our back to the waves, and whoever stood up to the waves the most out of 10 times won, And sometimes we tied, and sometimes he won, even though he's a little smaller than me. So
he sounds like really a typical American boy, and you have so many wonderful memories.
I do.
What were his dreams for the future? What did he want to do with his life?
Well, he wanted to, when he came out of high school, he wanted to either go in the Marines, because his first cousin was in the Marines, and he was very close with his first cousin. And also, my brother was 26 years Air Force. And so he thought about the Air Force also. We had him in ROTC in school. And so there's a picture, I believe, on there of him with the uniform on.
I know that you, Lucia, have described him as your miracle child because you didn't think that the two of you could have children. And lo and behold, you were able to.
Absolutely. We had, I didn't have any problem getting pregnant, but maintaining the pregnancy. I had a fibroid uterus and so had difficulties with that. Ended up having a myomectomy where they took out the posterior part of my uterus. And so we were told, chances are you probably won't be able to carry because you don't have as much of the uterus to contain the birth. And so I just said, okay, Lord, if it's your will, it will happen.
And it did.
And it did, and it did. And it was just amazing because I was a high-risk pregnancy. And so for those 9 months, I sat on the couch, cross-stitching, watching television, reading books, talking on the phone. I would come downstairs in the morning with Ron when he was going to work. And I would sit on the couch, and he'd prepare a big chest of food and drink for me. And I would sit there all day long until he came home. And then that was the only other time that I could go up the stairs and prepare for bed.
I know that you and Ron are now divorced. You live in Atlanta, Lucia, and Jordan was living, Ron, with you in Jacksonville.
Correct.
When was the last time you saw your son?
It was the day after Thanksgiving of 2012, and it was on Black Friday. On Thanksgiving, we had prayer, and Jordan was the actual one to lead the prayer, which normally teenagers don't do, but he led a very special prayer on Thanksgiving. And the next day, he told me that he was going to Town Center Mall in Jacksonville with his friends. He had called all his buddies up, and they were going to meet at the mall, and they were going to go a little bit light shopping and mostly look at the girls. You know how they do. And so I told him, take care. And he said, well, Dad, he said, I need a little change. I'm going to buy a little something out there. So I gave him some money to go. And then I told him I loved him. I hugged him and told him I was getting ready to go to work. And he hugged me back. And then I went to work about 2:30 that afternoon.
When you all found out that your son had been killed over an altercation about loud music, what did you think?
When I first was told, I was told that he was shot. So I didn't know he was killed. He was told he was shot, and they told me to go directly to the hospital and don't go to the scene. So it was, as you can imagine, a really excruciating drive for 30 minutes to go to the hospital, just praying that, number one, I don't hit anybody because I'm crying and I'm driving, and that maybe it's a flesh wound, maybe he just got hit in the ankle or whatever the case may be. But when I got there, they didn't have him registered or anything like that. And when I got to the back, they said, well, just wait, because of the HIPAA laws, we can't tell you who we have, because the patient we have doesn't have a wallet on him. Apparently it had dropped at the scene. And I had a whole hour not knowing whether Jordan was dead or alive. And so finally, the chaplain came in with 2 policemen and also the doctor. And the first words out of the doctor's mouth was, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, I was not able to revive. And he said a whole lot of other things, but that was the only words that my mind heard. And something just came out of me that apparently that was so, I think you have a sound inside of you that when it comes out and people hear it, they know something is wrong. And the policeman, who was 6'5", 250 pounds, started crying. The chaplain, she started crying. So the sound must have been something else. And I went to see my son, and they told me not to touch him because it was a homicide, and they had his sheet pulled up because he had gotten shot in the body, and he had a little blood on his ear, and his eye was just barely open. But, he was still Jordan. And so they told me not to touch him, but I did anyway, and I hugged him, and I talked to him. And one thing I remember doing is I smelled him. When you're a parent, you tend to smell your children. I smelled Jordan, and I didn't want that scent to ever leave, because right then and there, he was still Jordan. So when I smelled him, and I told him that God's going to take care of him now, and that I've done all I could for him on earth, and then I had to let him go.
17 years old, your miracle child. And I know that Charlie Walschlager and Aaron Johnson, as you mentioned, are here today. They weren't with Jordan that night, but they were 2 of his very best friends. And Aaron, what type of friend was Jordan?
Jordan was the goofy friend. He was always making jokes. And even if everybody was in a bad mood, he would be the one to change everybody's mood to happy. So if everybody was in a car and we was all mad at one situation, he could be mad also, but he would still be making jokes, and everybody would just forget that they were mad and be happy.
Just fun to be around, it sounds like. And Charlie, I know you and Jordan were very close. You all were homeschooled together in Atlanta. This must have been so shocking for you.
It was. I first found out over Facebook, and I just couldn't believe it. And for the first week of knowing, I couldn't even tell my mom about it. It's just so hard to not have it me anymore.
Still hard to talk about it almost a year and a half later. And I'm sure for you, Lucia, it must be really tough to talk about your son.
It's very difficult to talk about him because I always have to talk about him in past tense. Even though I know that he's present here, I can only talk about him in past tense. I can only talk about him in the form of what would have been his future. And that's very difficult to do because he was my future. I won't have grandchildren. I won't have a daughter-in-law. I won't have that extended future. I won't have, people generationally in the future that I can look at and say, that's part of me.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the verdict in Jordan's case. That's right after this. Welcome back, everyone. Jordan Davis was only 17 years old when he was shot and killed during a dispute over loud music in Jacksonville, Florida, on November 23, 2012. The case went to trial earlier this month, and Michael Dunn was convicted on 3 counts of attempted murder in the 2nd degree and for shooting a firearm into a car. He's facing a minimum of 60 years behind bars, but the charge of 1st-degree murder in connection with the shooting of Jordan Davis resulted in a mistrial. We've been talking to Jordan's parents, Lucia McBath and Ron Davis. And Lucia, what was it like sitting through that trial for you?
Grueling. It was the hardest thing outside of hearing about Jordan having died. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. to sit there and listen to what I believe was a made-up story devised to make Jordan and the boys look as if they were really not human beings. It was very grueling, very disheartening, very, very painful. And I still play those words back in my head again and again.
What words?
The boys had menacing looks on their faces. I was in fear for my life. There was a barrel, a shotgun. I know one when I see one. When he said, "You're not going to kill me, you blank blank," those words to me were words that he definitely intended to do what he did. And that's very painful to think that he didn't have any value, didn't see the boys as valuable human beings. It's really difficult because I think he just didn't see young boys for whatever things that were going through his mind at that moment. He didn't value human life.
Ron, I know that a lot of comparisons have been made to what happened to Jordan in the Trayvon Martin case. And I think it's ironic that you and Jordan actually discussed Trayvon Martin together, didn't you?
We did. When Trayvon Martin was killed, Jordan, he said, "Dad," he said, "he looks like me. He looks like me, Dad." And Jordan had a brown hoodie that he put on. And he said, "Look at that, Dad." And he came out of his room with the brown hoodie. He said, "He looks like me. That could have been me, Dad." And I thought about that. And so that's why we contacted Trayvon's parents. We just let them know that how we feel. And so I had a talk with Jordan, and I said, "Jordan," I said, "I'm having this talk, and you've heard this before." I said, "The way you talk to your friends is fine." I said, "But when you talk to adults, there's all types of adults out here with all types of problems. They have mortgage problems, they have family members that are sick, and they have things on their mind that you as a child, you don't understand." I said, "So when you talk to an adult, you have to take care of talking to them differently than you talk to your friends." And I would have that conversation. I think a lot of African-American parents have that conversation because there's this fear about African-American teenagers. And that's one thing that we should have a conversation in this country about, that they're just teenagers. Just because they're African-American, they're still American. And we should have a conversation in America about that.
John Phillips is an attorney who's representing the Davis family. And John, when it came to the charge of first-degree murder for Jordan, the jury could not agree on a verdict. Can you explain in layman's terms what happened here?
Corey Stroll even said he wanted the jury to pay particular attention to the stand your ground self-defense jury instruction. And it's written where lawyers don't even understand it. But what it's done is it's taken away in 2005, it took away the duty to retreat and the duty to be reasonable and try to rationalize things, and it empowered fear. And with where we are with the stereotyping of young black men, it has empowered fear even more. And so it confused the jury. And it doesn't, it's so subjective because all Michael Dunn had to do is get up there on the stand and tell an untruth and victimize the victim and confuse and hang up a couple of jurors.
I know he's appealing the verdict, Michael Dunn, and the prosecution plans to retry him on the first-degree murder charge. Do you think the outcome will be any different?
We do. A lot more is coming out about Michael Dunn. We've certainly invited the public that know Michael Dunn, the real Michael Dunn, and said this victimization of the victim is not right. Michael Dunn called himself the victim and the victor before this, and that's not right. That's not fair to this family. And if we've got to file defamation suits, if we've got to do whatever we got to do, we're not allowing lawyers to spin this thing out of control.
We received a statement from Corey Stroll, Michael Dunn's lawyer, speaking of that, which reads in part, "Regardless of any verdict or outcome, Jordan Davis is no longer alive. His family will carry that burden for the rest of their life. And Michael Dunn has spent over 15 months in jail, continually being threatened and harassed, and will possibly wait many more for any retrial. Whether you believe Mr. Dunn or not, he truly believed his life was in danger when he reached for his weapon and fired it. That is part of the statement he sent to us. What's your reaction?
Out of his own mouth, that was corroborated by an independent witness at the gas station, he said to the boys, "You're not going to talk to me that way." Now, when I say that to you, does that sound like I'm in fear of you, or does it sound like that I'm getting ready to do something to you when I say you're not going to talk to me that way? And then he grabs his gun. He's not in fear of his life because, number one, he had his window closed and he rolled his own window down. And when you're in fear, you wouldn't roll your window down. The second thing is Jordan never got out of the car. They were too close to even get out of the car. There was no mark on his car like Jordan opened the car door. There was no mark on his car. You know, so all you did was put fear in these 4 young men, these teenagers, and you came out with your gun and you shot 10 times and hit the vehicle 9 times. And 3 of the times that you shot, you actually, when they were trying to get out of your way, you ran to the back of your car and got into a police stance and shot 3 more shots into the car and said on the stand that had you not been out of range, you still had 5 more bullets left.
I know, Lucia, you've become very close with Trayvon Martin's mom, Sabrina Fulton, and that you're both working very hard to repeal the Stand Your Ground law in Florida. Why is that so important to you?
It's extremely important to me that this doesn't happen to any other parent's child. It's extremely important to me because across the country as I travel and talk to parents, I see countless numbers of victims. They have no names, they have no faces, they have no platform. And they're crying out, as we do, they're crying out for some sense of justice. How is it that the law allows the person who initiated the conflict to stand your ground and walk away, completely walk away with no accountability, no responsibility for their criminal behavior? How is an individual allowed to use the law as a means of solving their conflict, using that law for conflict resolution? How have we gotten so far with the laws that the law doesn't value human life, even the life of the victim?
Well, I'm so grateful to both of you for coming here and telling your story, telling Jordan's story. Ron and Lucia, thank you both so much. John Phillips, thank you to you. And Charlie, I so appreciate your time. And Aaron, thank you both, because I know it's still probably very difficult to talk about your friend as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back. In today's big conversation, we're talking about the verdict in what many are calling the loud music trial. TJ Holmes is a social commentator and contributor at MSNBC, and CNN's Paul Callan is a former New York City prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. And TJ, what was your reaction to the verdict?
You know, as the hours went by and the questions kept coming, and once we get up to hour 30 of deliberations, you could kind of see the writing on the wall, and you could kind of see what was about to happen. So once the verdict came in, it wasn't a surprise. But the shocking part of it all is after sitting here and listening to the segment with his parents describing their child picking up snow and eating it, a kid who liked to be on the beach, the shocking part is that somehow, some way, somebody looked at that kid with no weapon and thought just because he got loud, he was a threat enough that justified him being killed. It wasn't just done. Somebody on that jury thought the same thing. And I think that's the part that a lot in the black community and really across the country have a very difficult time.
You know what was interesting to me? The use of the word thug. That this man said he didn't like thug music, right? And that word has become so loaded.
It's loaded now, and it is that new code word, I do believe. And this was a great example. If you bear with me for a second, I challenge everybody in here to do it. Close your eyes and imagine a California girl Keep your eyes closed. Imagine a chess prodigy. Now keep your eyes closed and picture a thug. And people might not admit it, but when you picture a thug, you think young black man. That comes to your mind. That's what we have to find a way to correct in people's minds to where they don't see a 17-year-old child and consider him this thing and this threat to the point that you can pull a trigger and kill him and actually maybe not get punished for it.
Paul, what do you think happened? Why was the jury unable to reach an agreement about the first-degree murder charge when it came to Jordan's death?
Well, I have to say, I followed the case very closely, and as a homicide prosecutor here in New York, I've tried similar kinds of cases, both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and I was stunned and shocked by the verdict, and I'll tell you why. I was shocked because of one fact, and that fact is that after the shooting, when Dunn's fiancée comes back and gets back in the car, she testifies that Dunn never said to her that he saw a gun. Now, here's a man who has pulled out a weapon, fired 10 shots, and then they flee the scene and they go to a bed and breakfast and order pizza. Well, if he was acting in self-defense legitimately, wouldn't he be talking about that? That would be the only thing you would be talking about, that a gun was pulled on me and I had to protect myself, and she'd be saying, let's get to the police. And so the way he acted and what he did after the shooting said to me, the jury will never buy this self-defense claim. But they did buy the at least 2 of them bought it. Now remember, there was no acquittal on this count. It was a hung jury. It only means that there were 2 jurors who thought.
I thought there were 3.
Well, it might be up to 3 now. I don't know. I haven't seen the more recent interviews of jurors because, you know, they go back and they try to reconstruct what went on.
And in fact, Valerie, juror number 4, voted to convict on the first-degree murder charge. And in an interview for Nightline, she was asked whether race played a role in the crime. Let's listen to what she said.
In that room, it was never presented that way. We looked at it as a bad situation where teenagers were together and words were spoken and lines were crossed.
Is it impossible to separate race from this whole story?
You know, I've seen these interviews with jurors before, and they always say race is not involved. And race is almost always involved, especially where you have a middle-class white confronted by adolescent black teenagers. I mean, he obviously resented their music. He resented the way they were dressed. And he was not gonna take any guff from them. So you can't say race didn't play a part.
And in fact, we have some letters Michael Dunn sent to his family while awaiting trial, and I wanted to read from one. He wrote, "This may sound a bit radical, but if more people would arm themselves and kill these effing idiots when they're threatening you, eventually they may take the hint and change their behavior." That is a pretty scary letter.
It's an honest one. And I think there are several of those letters that has a lot of that similar language, and that is where you really get an insight into how he feels. But maybe a lot of people might not go as far as he did in pulling a trigger. But I think there are a lot of people out there who still see these young boys, these young African-American men as threats, and that's where race played into it, in my opinion. Forget the jury room, race played into it in that parking lot. And if he had looked at those young boys just a little differently as just teenagers playing their music, we wouldn't be sitting here right now.
You know, 33 states, Paul, have some version of stand your ground laws. And I'm just curious, do you think these laws are giving people too much license to respond to the perception of fear?
Well, you know, it's a complicated question, and I want to say, in this case, neither side argued the stand your ground law to the jury, okay? But the judge submitted it because, and it
obviously,
it has an impact.
Tainted their view of the case.
I think it creates a mindset, because here's what stand your ground. Now, if I try a murder case in New York, okay, if I have the ability to retreat and avoid a confrontation, I have to use that opportunity before I use deadly physical force. In Florida and the stand your ground states, you can stand your ground and shoot back. You don't have to step on the gas and try to escape the threatening situation if it in fact existed. And I think it creates a mindset in people that
it's okay.
It's okay. I'm not going to be careful. I can stand my ground and shoot back at that guy. And I think that
if I feel threatened.
Well, if I feel threatened.
Or if I say I feel threatened.
That's right. And you're more likely to say, you know something, if the law says I can stand my ground, I'm gonna win a case like this. Now, do people go through that detailed a thought process? I'm not so sure, but I think a mindset is created where you're more likely to shoot somebody, and it's a dangerous law.
But before we go, TJ, because we're about out of time, but what do you hope people are going to take away from this whole sad case?
I hope people pay attention to laws in your state. Please, by all means, check it out, see what the law is in your state. And I think that was one of the greatest hashtags ever on Twitter, hashtag dangerous black kids. And people were posting picture of their innocent little kids doing fun things, playing in the snow, doing whatever else. And I think we have just got to get around this idea that when you see a young black man, he is a threat. And now a case like this shows that you're threatened enough or you're scared enough that you could actually kill the kid and maybe end up getting away with it.
TJ Holmes and Paul Callan, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.